even if you're in the worst, like let's say you're having the worst DPDR episode, and your whole identity is in that. So you're online, you're reading about it, you're highly invested in it. Your brain is almost like solidifying around it because it's so invested into this version or identity of yourself that you created. And I think that's something that's very important to start being able to cut through, that is not mixing your identity with the condition. It's really important to frame this in a way that you say, okay, it is challenging, but actually my life is going to be so much more fulfilling and meaningful because of this experience. Not, oh, my life is going to be, that I'm defined by this, and this is who I am.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean O'Connor, author of the Depersonalization Manual, and today we're doing something that's a first for the channel. We're actually having a follow-up interview with someone we've spoken to before to discuss life after depersonalization and long-term recovery. So today I'm speaking with Finn Connaughty from Dublin, Ireland. Now, most of you will have already seen Finn's first interview, which we did back in July of 2023. This was a very popular interview on the channel with loads of positive comments and feedback. If you haven't seen that initial interview, I'll link to it in the video description. It's really thorough and excellent, so check that out when you get a chance. But just to recap, Finn is now 26 years old. His DPDR was triggered by a bad drug experience. He struggled with the condition for 7 years, but fortunately had made a complete recovery by the time we spoke last year. So I was thrilled when Finn emailed me last week to say, quote, "Hey Sean, I've been doing really well. I've been doing somatic experiencing and have started a spiritual practice. I now think of DPDR as a gift that changed my life in a positive direction, and I would love to get the chance to do a follow-up interview with you, as I feel I have a lot more information that could help people." End quote. I thought this was a fantastic idea, and how interesting it would be to do a follow-up interview with somebody a year later to catch up and see what life after depersonalization is really like. Finn, you're very welcome back to the channel. Thanks for being with us today.
Hello, how you doing? Very excited to be back.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Great to see you again, man. And how has life been in the meantime? I believe you're not actually in Dublin at the moment. Is that right?
No, yeah, I'm currently in Wales. I've been doing lots of traveling since last spoke. So, yeah, no, life is good.
Great. What are you up to in Wales?
I'm doing music, and then I have two friends who moved into a house, and I'm helping them with some of the work around the house as well. So it's very nice to be in the countryside. It's pretty spectacular here. It's lots of sheep and open fields, and it's very, very nice.
That's great. Tell me about the music. What's the project?
Well, I have two albums. I've made two albums already, but I'm making another two. So one is my own solo album. Another one then is I'm doing it with my friend here. So we're doing like a collaboration album. So yeah, we're just working on the songs, and we're going to be doing some recording as well. And it's a pretty fantastic setting because there's just no noise of any description. It's like totally quiet. Perfect recording environment.
Didn't Led Zeppelin do that for Led Zeppelin 4?
I'm pretty sure they did, and I also know that we're very close to the studio where Bohemian Rhapsody was recorded.
Ooh,
So
nice.
it's a good omen.
Yeah. Are you catching some good Freddie Mercury vibes? You are.
Oh yeah. I'm practicing my Ayo. Uh, practicing various different embodying my Freddie Mercury.
Nice. That's great to hear, man. So it sounds like things are going really good for you at the moment. So Finn, last time we spoke was just over a year ago,
Yeah.
July of 2023. So how has life been for you in the meantime? Still post-recovery life after depersonalization?
I think the main thing that I want to say, I have a couple of things that I want to just clarify. I feel like since the last interview. So that's why I was interested in doing a follow-up thing. At the time when I did the interview, I was studying zoology. So I was very in a kind of scientific worldview. And I had recovered from DPDR and I had been moving in this way. And then a lot of series of events happened in my life that then moved me into actually sort of not so much more in a spiritual direction than my rational. I was kind of in a rational mode when I did the last interview. So lots of it was very good, but I want to clarify on certain things. I think one thing that really, I was like, damn, I shouldn't have said that in the last interview was when we talked about meditation. I said I was kind of a bit against it at the time just because of the world that I was in. I think I was slightly maybe skeptical about some of these things, but I have to say now, because I also as well, I think people think that life stops, like you recover and then like nothing ever happens to you again, or like that's the end of life. And like, I've had post recovery, I've had really challenging things to deal with, not DPDR related, just life related. And I think that's another thing that that I want to share with people is that your life is not DPDR, post DPDR. Of course, the symptoms, like, of course, you recover. You still have to have tools and mechanisms to deal with life. It's not like, your life is just gonna end or be completely, nothing's gonna happen to you again. So that's for me. This practice that I'm doing now, I think, can really help people. I'd love to share it with people as part of their recovery, as well as part of as the manual, as those things that are really important to recovery. So that's why I want to do a sort of more, I think, rounded version of the interview I already did.
Okay, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely something that when you get back to life, like after recovery from DPD or any anxiety-based condition, you get back to your normal day-to-day life. And part of normal day-to-day life is stress. And that's perfectly okay. But, it's important to distinguish between the normal stresses of day-to-day life and the ongoing fight or flight response that is DPDR. But I mean, for me, I remember that when I recovered, I found those quite comforting in a way. Like I remember like trying to, like, I remember I needed to start working again. So I was a musician at the time, and I was like trying to get gigs again. Like, and I had to start I had to reinsure my car because I hadn't driven in so long. I'd move out of my parents' house, but all that stuff felt really lovely because it was like, this is like the stress of like paying my rent. Like, okay, but I've always had that. And, I mean, having gone through DPDR kind of almost gave me a context for not like enjoying that stuff or anything, but just, I guess, not being kind of not even worried about it, but, I guess being more patient with myself when I had that type of anxiety. But it's I think something we talked about in the last interview as well, Finn, is that you said that something like, if I ever, you said when I had DPDR, I thought if I ever recover from this, I'm just going to party, and I thought the same thing. I was like, I would just go and like party for like 6 months or a year. But recovery is you just literally get back to like absolute normality.
Yeah.
And all of like the small stresses and anxieties that come with that. But they feel quite welcome. Yeah.
I think it's very important for understanding how to recover. And the one idea that I came up recently with is that, what if people talk about, because I've had people talk to me and message me and ask me questions. And one thing that I keep noticing is people saying it's like they're fixated upon recovery. Like, when will I recover? Mm-hmm. So like they want to recover from DPDR. So they have DPDR and they want to recover from it. And that's kind of like you're in a kind of bind, because if you have something and you don't want to have it, then you're sort of saying, this is not okay that I have this condition, which I think increases stress levels around the condition, and actually, in a weird, sort of slightly paradoxical way, delays the symptoms from actually easing, because it just becomes another thing, another event in your head, another sort of goal or thing that you have to get to. Like, I have to get out of this condition. And then I think it's not a healthy way of looking at it. So I was thinking about this idea about, like, what if already within you, and even when you have the condition, what if there is that person that is recovered, like that's already there, so that you're not like attaining, you're not trying to get yourself out of this. It's like, okay, it's already here. I don't have to, I'm not like struggling or fighting to get out of this condition. What if I'm already recovered? I just have to realize that I have that within me, and that my nervous system and my body and my brain will relax, and I will be able to come back into my body and my experience and my reality. And taking that kind of intensity out of the experience.
Yeah, interesting. There's it's one of the things that trips us up so often in the recovery process is that we desperately want to get rid of the condition, and we want it to happen as soon as possible. But in contextualizing it like that, you are categorizing it as something that is important. And that's all that your brain cares about. All your brain cares about is like, what's the important thing? What are we focusing on? And when we do that, we're pointing at it kind of over and over again. There's something like there's a Freud said something like there's no such thing as negativity in the mind, and there's no way to there's no such thing as kind of like positive and negative thoughts. There's just the content of the thought. So if you actively focus on a thought and say, well, this is fantastic, I'd love to keep this around, or you focus on the same thought and you say, I have to get rid of this by Thursday at 4:00. Either way, all that your brain registers is that you're focusing on it, you're pointing at it. The context of it being positive or negative doesn't matter. And the mistake that we make is that we keep pointing at it in a negative fashion and say, I have to get rid of this. Why isn't this gone? Why isn't this gone? And all that's communicating to the brain over and over again is that it is important. It deserves your attention. And then we wake up the next day and wonder why we're still thinking about it. So yeah, but fortunately there are ways and means based on, like, cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, of giving yourself the space to let those thoughts go.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to, because I was maybe slightly against sort of meditation, because I was concerned that it might people might sort of focus on the symptoms too much or something like that. I don't even know why I thought that, but now from the practice that I'm doing, I mean, I have it's called my own practice. I'm not religious, but I think I definitely now am spiritual. And I noticed that the more you're able to sort of, it's quite a difficult thing to explain, because I think your brain wants, your rational brain wants something to do. So if I say, like, you need to be able to surrender to the experience, your brain will say, okay, I'm going to surrender to the experience. And then you're kind of there like, okay, I'm surrendering. You're not really like, it's not really like actually surrendering. It's sort of like you're just doing it because want to get out of the condition. But the thing that I noticed for even myself over the last while, and I had to do this not for DPDR, but just for myself, so that I was, because things were happening, like difficult things were coming up in my life, which is going to happen to you after you recover, because life just keeps going on. And I was sort of getting slightly, I was getting annoyed, or I was getting emotional about those things. And I really started to pay attention to what my body was doing, how it was reacting, how it was responding. And that's part of what somatic healing is, or you are sort of non-judgmentally watching, paying attention to how your body responds. So that can be physical sensations, that can be the emotions that come up, and what you're doing is you're not hyper fixating upon it. So you're not saying, okay, so like if you have blurry vision with the DPDR condition, you're not sitting there sort of ruminating over the symptoms. You're not constantly just following one thought into the next. But what you're doing is you're saying, okay, I have this symptom. This symptom is here. I'm going to non-judgmentally just observe it and see what's going on. What is it that my body is saying? And I think often with this, your body is most likely saying, please give me a break. give me a chance to relax and just switch off and come back down into sort of peaceful existence.
So much of this is it's a habit, and it's a wheel that just keeps going. And because our anxiety levels are so high, we often don't give ourselves the chance to look at what's happening objectively. So like one of the most frustrating aspects of anxiety is the fact that we experience the symptoms of anxiety through the filter of anxiety. So when someone, for example, the visual stuff is a fantastic example. So like if you describe something like with the visual stuff and you say, okay, well, I feel like my vision is damaged. I feel like I'm seeing like floaters and tracers. I feel like I'm constantly like seeing things in my peripheral vision that are grabbing my attention, and this is terrifying. And I think I've damaged my vision somehow. So from a non-anxious perspective, what you're describing is what happens to the visual cortex in fight or flight. Like that's what happens. You become hyper aware of what's happening in your visual field and in your peripheral vision, and you will notice things like tracers and floaters, for example, which again, normal parts of the human visual field. But then you will panic that means something is wrong, or that you're going crazy, or that your vision is damaged. But then looking at it from a non-anxious perspective, you say, well, I understand what that is. But changing the context of it gives you the space to start letting it go and stop obsessing over it. And as you said, like to a great degree, all that your brain wants in the recovery process is just let's just have a chance. Let's just to take our foot off the pedal for a while and just try and look at this from a different camera angle. And when you train yourself to do that, you go, oh, right. So hang on, these visual symptoms, that it doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. The fact that I feel like I can't read a book. I can't read the paragraph of a book. Well, that's because your mind is racing, because your brain is acting as if there's a bear chasing you. Okay, well, that's not pleasant, but it makes sense. The feeling of disconnection that you have, you better believe that's part of the fight or flight response. And when you understand it, as you said, Finn, like you start to give yourself a chance to look at this, and then the wheel starts kind of slowing down and then going in the other direction. But understand, there's a beautiful phrase that says anxiety is caused by the fear of anxiety, and in that same sense, depersonalization is caused by the fear of depersonalization. When we start to understand it and understand the symptoms, we start to take that power away from it, and we start to become less and less fearful of it. And then when you stop becoming afraid of it, it stops being a problem altogether, and then you start forgetting about it.
That was like that reminds me of the saying in Northern Irish politics: violence breeds violence.
Violence breeds violence.
Yeah. So like when the violence would start, more violence will just cause more violence to occur. It seems to be a pattern, I think, in life.
Yeah.
And the other thing that um, the other thing that I learned through doing, I've been doing pretty. I don't know if I'm not doing like formal meditation, but I am doing. I highly recommend. I learned this from going to. I went to a Buddhist seminar a while ago, and um, it's just what they have a phrase called non-doing. So it's just when you don't do anything.
Mm.
So set aside 15 minutes of your day where you don't do anything. So you can. So I think it's very important to keep your life moving. I don't think this is not. This is why I think it's good to set a period of time. So throughout the day, go do all the stuff that you have to do. So keep looking after yourself. Go exercise. Go work. Make sure that you're doing all those things in your life. Don't put your life on hold. But then I think dedicating 15 minutes where you just say, okay, I'm going to not do anything. I'm just going to observe what is going on internally and mentally. And what I think is what I think is really beneficial is in I think lots of Eastern traditions, but in many forms of meditation, what they talk about is how this dialogue that's happening in your brain is creating a reality. So it's creating a narrative around your reality. And I remember when you're in the thick of DPDR, you have this sort of ongoing dialogue about your condition in your head. And you just think that it's quite incredible how your brain can do this. Like you think that is reality. You think it's like real. You think that, oh, this is like who I am. This is this is like, I'm defined by this condition. And I think that's something that's very important to start being able to cut through. That is not mixing your identity with the condition. So another thing that maybe would help people, and I think is a really good thing, is saying, rather than saying like, I have DPDR, I have this thing, saying, okay, I'm experiencing the conditions of DPDR. I am here and I am experiencing association. I'm experiencing this connection. It's not who I am. It's not ultimate reality. It's not absolute. It's an experience that I'm having. And I think cutting that tie between your like getting your identity or your identification, that's another thing that I learned from Buddhist teachings and I think from many Eastern traditions. They talk about anything that you identify with, your brain will start to attach to and start to protect as well. So even if you're in the worst, like let's say you're having the worst DPDR episode and your whole identity is in that. So you're online, you're reading about it, you're highly invested in it. It's almost this, it's like, I don't know, it is kind of awful on some level, but it's like your brain is almost like solidifying around it because it's so invested into this version or identity of yourself that you created. And I think that the liberation and the freedom comes from knowing that, if your mind can do this, your mind can also create an incredible reality that is not based upon all these sort of habitual thoughts.
Certainly. I think it's something to mention as well, is that like a lot of people, and I certainly experienced this, was that when they go through DPDR, especially towards the start when you're frantically trying to make sense of it, we tend to very often ascribe a spiritual meaning to it while we're going through it. So for me, I thought at one point I was going through ego death, that I had taken drugs and I now had ego death. I thought that I was actually dead. I thought I was in a coma, or I was dreaming. I thought it was some sort of like kind of cosmic challenge, like that I was some
Mm.
kind of like spiritual dark night of the soul that I had to go through. But I don't mean in a kind of like metaphysical terms. I mean like this was literally happening to me. Like,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, like I was in a film or something. You know, it was that kind of thing. Um, and it's very important to, and this is not to say that like when you're recovered from DPDR, in the same way that if you go through any very difficult experience, that you can't look back on it and interpret it in a narrativistic and kind of manner. But when you're going through it, it's very important to remember that what you're experiencing, it's not a spiritual test. Like what you're going through is the mental equivalent of heart palpitations. It's
Mm.
like it's just anxiety. It
Mm.
is just, it's not a dark night of the soul. It's not an ego death. It's not a spiritual test. This is literally like the mental equivalent of shoulder tension. That's like
Mm.
that's what it is. But there's a thing I talk about in the DP manual called it's a psychological phenomenon known as proportionality bias,
Mm.
which refers to the idea that when human beings go through an experience that feels absolutely massive, we have
Mm.
a tendency to ascribe very big explanations to it because that feels more in keeping with what we're experiencing. So when you go through something like DPDR and you feel like reality has turned inside out,
Mm.
and you'll never be the same again. You'll never close that door, and everything is warped and changed. And then you might read something that says, or someone might say to you, "Oh, this is like, this is a spiritual test," and you go,
Mm.
"Oh, Jesus, yeah, okay, well, maybe it is." And then another person says, "Well, it's actually just it's anxiety because you had a panic attack while smoking weed or taking the 2CP or whatever, right?"
Yeah.
But when you're going through it, you're thinking like, "Oh no, this is a spiritual quest," like because
Mm.
because I felt anxiety before, and anxiety never affected my vision. Anxiety never made me feel like I was in a different dimension, right?
Mm.
But but part of recovery is taking that narrative scaffolding off of it and looking at it and saying like, no, this is actually it. Like Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is the most likely, with all things being equal. This is it. It is just anxiety. But that's not to say that like when you come through it, that you
Mm.
can you look back at it and kind of process it in a more kind of narrative style,
Yeah.
and it could be very helpful to do that. But it is important, I think, while going through it, to remember that like this is no more a spiritual test than having a panic attack in Tesco. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
um, and also, but when you made a really good point about, you know, not being identified, not mixing your identity with the condition. um, I think that like people can very often, like for example, Finn, like something people say to me very often is they say, "Well, I am I can't recover from this because I am a very analytical person."
Mm.
Or I'm a particularly creative individual and I have a tendency towards introspection. So my identity, the type of person I am, means that even though these other people have recovered, I can't recover because I have quite an intensive self focus. But all like that doesn't make any sense. In practical terms, everyone can recover. There's no line that you cross that you can't come back from. But it's when you mix your identity into it and you say like, but I can't recover because I am this. It is
Yeah.
again constructing more kind of narrative scaffolding around it that's just overcomplicating what is actually a very, very simple process. And one more thing. Um, I've been meditating most of my life, and I absolutely love it. I'm not sure what I would do without it. It's such a good practice. When I developed DPDR, I found that I had to stop meditating
Mm.
because I found that I would get so involved in my thoughts that what I felt I needed to do was to kind of get out of my head long enough
Mm.
start to let the anxiety go. And when I was meditating, I wasn't able to do that. But so in the first editions of the DP manual, I wrote, okay, don't meditate because it's not going to help you. But over the years, I've spoken to people who said that they did meditate while with DPDR, and they found that it helped them to be grounded and more kind of to let go of the anxiety. So in the later editions of the book, I changed that to say, look, in my opinion, you can recover with or without meditation. If you try it and you find that it's helpful and grounding for you, then by all means use it. But it's interesting to see the different experiences people have. But certainly since I recovered, I meditate most days of the week, and it's a great practice to have.
Yeah, I think that's why I think the last time I was slightly cautious around speaking about it. But I have to say that, I mean, I'm not going to get into it now, but the series of events that I have had in my life, even since the last interview, have been so profound. And I studied biomedical sciences for 4 years, so I'm a pretty objective person.
Sorry, Finn. Sorry to interrupt you. So you were studying zoology the last time we spoke.
Yeah.
So did you complete that qualification?
Yeah, I finished it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it brought me to, because of that, I was in Kenya, and then I spent a month working in Costa Rica, and that's why I am, because I know what you said is very true. I know that there is a sort of, it can be a sort of spiritual, religious obsession sort of element to the condition, when you can start to hyper focus on sort of philosophical existential questions. So that's not what I'm talking about, because that's just anxiety. You know what I mean? That is like an anxious mental response to things. But what I want to say in terms of, I mean, I can just say it's real for me, is that if you give these symptoms, thoughts, space, and non-judgmentally sort of observe and accept them, they will dilute, they will dissolve. And that's why I think it's really important to frame this in a way that you say, okay, it is challenging, but actually my life is going to be so much more fulfilling and meaningful because of this experience. Not that, oh, my life is going to be, that I'm defined by this, and this is who I am. I do a practice every day of saying, of really trying to get myself into a grateful state, a state of gratitude, not taking things for granted. And I will write down every day 5 things. They can be anything. And I really think it's important for your brain to do this. And I also, let's just remove any belief systems or anything. Even if you're hardcore atheist, it's fine. Don't mind. Just write down things that you're grateful for, and get yourself into that state of where you get, it's not you're trying to get rid of it, but you're not hyper focusing on these sort of mental cycles that happen within the condition. So just, and I think then the inverse for me, it is, I understand what you're saying, but my perspective on it has changed slightly in terms of for me, it's like, it wasn't a spiritual test. I'm conscious of not saying, like, making people, I don't want to make people anxious. So I'm not trying to make people anxious, but what I'm saying is that you can use this condition as a way to come to a profound sense of peace. And I don't know if I would have, I mean, I can't believe the level of peace that I feel having gone through that. And to even say, saying, "Oh God, I'm so happy that it happened to me," is something that I didn't even think that I would ever say. Um, so it is a difficult. It's a kind of nuance. It's a difficult nuance to get between how you can this. The condition itself is not anything. The thoughts that you're having in the condition are not meaningful in terms of they're not like the action. If you're going to use, for me, the real quality in terms of a spiritual experience is is when you move past the condition. That's when you're actually in a state of peace. The condition, your thoughts are not, the thoughts in the condition are not anything of value.
Yes, and I think as well, for something I experienced, and I think most people do, just about everyone actually who goes through maybe not just DPDR but any anxiety-based condition, is that once you have gone through that experience, and it can be incredibly difficult, but when you have that intimate knowledge of anxiety, and you've gone through it not just from like reading the theoretical outline of it, but actually having gone through it and gone through like the furnace of having that period of thinking like, I think I might be dying, I think I might be going crazy, I don't know if I'll ever find an explanation for this, I don't even know if there's a word to describe what I'm going through, nobody can help me, I can't help me. And for me, that went on for months and months. For other people, it could be weeks. For other people, it could be years before they find out what this is and what to do about it. But when you've gone through that and you recover, which you always can do, it changes your relationship with anxiety. So that like, and again, that as we were saying at the start of the call pin, like that's not to say that like you don't have your normal day-to-day anxieties, of course you do. But for me, like to know that to recognize what happened and to understand that like the reason it turned into a problem in the first place was because I didn't understand what was happening. And I catastrophized that these feelings that I had meant that I was dying or I was going crazy, and then it turned into this big, spectacular, awful thing. But because I know that now, because I've gone through it, that precludes it, that prevents it from ever happening again, right? So that gives me a sense of peace and a sense of happiness. So just briefly as well, Finn. So you were in what were you doing in Kenya and Costa Rica?
I was working with animals, so I was I was in Kenya. I went on as part of my degree, so that was we basically went to the national parks, and then I was in Costa Rica. I was working at an animal rehabilitation center, and yeah, I also want to say that I think people who have this condition, I think the thing that I recognize within myself, and this is why I think, I mean, I don't have a problem with caffeine. I did at the time, but like I'm okay now. But I think that, you know, and anyone who is suffering from this condition, I think their nervous system is generally pretty sensitive. So they have a pretty, like, I mean, I look at some of the people that I know and I think, holy Jesus, if I lived my life that way, I think my nervous system would just shut down and I would never be able to function. So there is like, if some people's nervous system can tolerate this amount of stress, I think people who have this or have the propensity towards this probably have just a bit more of a sensitive nervous system. And rather than making that into a negative, I think it's actually a real benefit. And I've noticed this over the last while of my life, is that I'm able to pick up on things that maybe other people are not able to pick up on. I can kind of feel things, I can intuitively sense things in a way, you know, that other people don't. They have their own things that they do fantastically. And for me, I'm able to sense things, I think, at at a higher level. And that's a double-edged sword, because if I don't look after myself, or if I'm not being conscious of my health, that can turn into a negative pattern. But if you can use it as something fantastic, I mean, I'm going to work with animals, and I'm really able to actually pick up on, how to look after this animal the best way. I'm able to use that as a strength. And I think that anyone who has this condition needs to try to turn it around and say, okay, yeah, I do have this nervous system that is maybe a bit more sensitive to stimulants, or sensitive to, so if some people I know could literally they'd smoke weed until they, like, just all day long, and they'd wake up the next day and they'd be like, "Oh, hi, how you doing?" And I just look at them and think, I think, like, how is this person able to do that?
I know these people too. And
Yeah.
it floors me, like. And these are people, and I know friends of mine in like jobs that are like high responsibility, and like they can just like absolutely cane it with weed, watch a movie, get up the next day, and they are and they're like better than ever. And I'm just like, if that was me, I would not be out of bed for a week, like,
Yeah. So I think it's a difficult thing to come to terms with. Like, I have pretty much as sober as an existence as I can, because it sucks on one level, right? Because you think, oh damn, fear of missing out. Everyone else is doing all this stuff or whatever, and I'm missing out on it. It's really difficult, because, and this is another thing with identity, is that if you imagine the person that you were when you got when the condition was triggered, so the condition was triggered by the person that you are at that time, whatever habits, ways that you were acting, it led you to this moment where it triggered something in you. Your body said, I cannot take this level of stress and anxiety. I can't function with this anymore, because it's just too much. So it goes into this fight or flight shutdown mode. So if you can see this, and it is difficult, because there's moments where I thought, like, I can't change my life this way. I can't go do this. And you have those kind of limiting beliefs. But actually using it as a way to, my life is completely different, and it's a completely different path, and it's just so much. I mean, I feel like the fulfillment level is just so much more than if it hadn't happened and I had continued on the path. I don't know what, I mean, I can't even think of what I'd be doing. And that is such that level of hope, and for someone in the condition is so important to keep that level of perspective and say, no, this is, if I can change my perspective on this condition, and rather than saying, oh God, I want to get rid of it, and this is the worst thing just get me out of this, which is fair enough. But saying, okay, what is it that I can learn? What is it that how can I use this to grow in my life? How can I use this to move me in the direction of where I want to go? It will completely change your perspective on the symptoms, and you will see it as part of your growth, not as a hurdle, not as something that is blocking you from life, but actually something that is really going to give you some seriously valuable and useful tools and lessons. As you said, like, the ability to have normal, everyday, stressful things feel quite pleasant. I mean, what a gift that is. Like, like what an incredible thing to be able to say that about something so, well, maybe considered mundane. That is kind of mundane for a lot of people. and that is, I think it's a real gift, and I don't think it's get framing moving in that direction, moving in that way of saying DPDR is so much more fruitful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to say as well that that this is because I know there's going to be people watching this and they're going to be saying, okay, so does this mean that like that when I recover, I'm going to be like I am somehow different? Like there is
Okay, yeah,
some
yeah,
big
no,
change,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And because that's the nature of anxiety. Is you watch an interview like this and you're thinking like, so what? So he's saying you don't actually get back. No, you do. You get
yeah, 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 yeah,
you get 100% back
yeah.
to normal, right?
Mm,
And but it's just but what we're talking about is how you kind of like interpret that experience in the same way that like any hardship, that you go through, like how you think of it afterwards, um helps you to process it. But
mm.
in terms of actually like getting back to normal, it is 100% getting back to normal.
Yeah,
Something you mentioned as well.
let me say that is a very important point. Is that you go back to there is no one fear that like you're somehow altered forever or that you're like changed and that you can't. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that normality, as in what you would have called normality before, so like normal everyday existence, you see it through a lens of just like almost like everything is almost just brighter, and it's like I don't have that sense of like taking it for granted anymore. I feel like, wow, I'm like, holy crap, I took normality for granted. I took the feeling that everyone feels all the time of just, this is, I get up and I feel normal. I realize now that like I completely took it for granted. So it's actually just, it's like, yeah, so you go 100% back to normality. No one fear.
Yeah. And for me as well, something that I definitely found afterwards was that it gave me a great sense of a much greater sense of compassion
Yeah.
and humility, in the best possible way, because I remember how I thought about, you know, before I was 25, like before I developed DPDR, like how I thought about things like, for example, anxiety and depression. And it would just, in my head, it was just like, well, if you feel anxious, just kind of stop it. Like,
Mm,
if you're feeling depressed, just like, just, just go and do something that doesn't make you, and I really thought, I mean, I'm not that I would have spent my whole life thinking like that. But when I went through DPDR and I saw that like this, like how when you're going through it at first, like I mean, it's so random,
yeah.
and at the start you feel so completely helpless, and nothing you can do will feels like it makes a difference at the start. At the start, it always improves. But having gone through that, and as I said earlier, the feeling that like nobody can help me and I can't help me, like whenever I spoke to people after that about anything to do with like mental health or just even things in general, I found I was a lot more compassionate, and I
Mm,
was a lot more open to hearing other people's experience, because I remember that when I was going through that experience and speaking to people, and I knew when I was telling people things like, I feel like I'm not here, like I knew they didn't understand what I was talking about. But when people gave me the time to hear me out and just say, okay, well, what is this? Is this a symptom of anxiety? And that meant the world to me, and again, it's also one of the reasons I wrote the book and started doing, like years later, doing coaching sessions and things like that. um, Something you mentioned as well, and I thought was a really interesting point, was the when the thing of like being very sensitive as well, and saying, I can't recover because I'm more sensitive, or even the idea of you going off to Kenya and Costa Rica and stuff. But that when you have a particularly a creative mind, or you have particularly like an interrogative mind or problem solving, um, again, I know this is something we referred to earlier, but like the idea that you're more likely to be stuck in this because you have that type of mind. But it's actually a really, really positive thing,
Yeah.
because if you have that type of problem solving mind, you can, what you need to do is take that intelligence and that creativity and point it towards something that actually interests you, that challenges you and rewards you.
Mm,
Like going to Kenya to work with animals, or
mm,
for me, it was like I one of the things I did was I did a master's degree in film studies, like towards the end of my time with DPR. And at the time I was like, there's no way in hell I can do this. But when I started doing it, and I was like, I have to write essays, I have to do presentations, I have to meet new people, I have to socialize. And my brain was like, yeah, let's do this. Like, because I'm good at it, I enjoy it. And it just wrenched the focus of my attention away from the anxiety DPDR, like long enough to show my brain that I didn't have to focus on it.
mm.
Like, and giving yourself challenges, um, your brain devours it. Your brain's just like, yeah, well, my God, let's do this instead. Um, and the only reason you've been in this feedback loop with anxiety is because you thought that what I needed to do was obsessively focus on it until it goes away. Um, Such an interest, and so counterintuitive when you're going
Yeah.
through it. But such an interesting experience as well.
The other thing what you were saying about the reason why I wanted to say about and talk about meditation, and even if it's not meditation, let's say we don't use that word, or you just, what I do sometimes is I just sit in a bench. I just sit in a bench and I just pay attention to the world just for 15 minutes, whatever it is. You start to recognize that that kind of obsessive entity in your head is just an energy. It's just it's like it has its own momentum, and separating yourself from that obsessed, not thinking that I am this obsessive, like that this obsessive thinker is reality, and that all these thoughts that I'm thinking obsessively are true. You're able to take a step back and say, no, this is like an emotion, and it's caught up in these thoughts, and these thoughts are feeding this emotion, and it's just a cycle. And being able to give that yourself that perspective, that being able to see, oh, that's not the truth. That's not reality. It's like this sort of emotion mixed with thoughts that are just sort of viciously feeding each other. Be able to take a step back from that is just so crucial. And the other thing I think is what you're saying about, which is total, I think is really true about this, for people who develop this. I've always been a person who thinks deeply about things. I reflect about things. And yeah, that can be a negative, because you can develop something like this where you sort of hyper fixate and focus and think about things. But as you said, there's a lot of things going on in the world that are not great. And it's fantastic to have people who are able to sit or reflect or actually, really get to the bottom of something in a constructive way, not in a destructive way where you're just ruminating. But, the world needs people who are able to think about things in a different way, in a different manner. And I think that is a lot of the times with people who develop this condition, they do think about things in a very deep manner. They're not. That was one of the things that I noticed when I smoked weed. Like, if I smoked weed, I couldn't just sit there and laugh at the tea. I'd be thinking like, well, why are we watching this show? What is this show all about? Like, and it would just get super, super existential. So on that, it's not constructive on that level. I mean, if that's the kind of deep thinking you're doing, it's probably going to be quite destructive. But if you can get to a place where you're relaxed, where your nervous system is at peace and you're at ease, it's a real superpower. I found it as a real superpower in my life to be able to have this brain that looks at things from different perspectives, looks at things from different angles, doesn't always just rush into something because everyone else is doing it. Um, so it's like changing the obsessive thoughts, changing the kind of existentialism into something really constructive, like you said, whether it's creative pursuit or finding some sort of purpose for it. It's a real superpower. I mean, really it is. And it's not something to sort of hate about yourself or wish that you didn't have, or wish that, oh, I wish I wasn't like this, so therefore I could go, I don't know, just go back to doing what everyone else is doing. Because I have to say, most society is very unhealthy. It's good to have these thoughts of like, maybe I shouldn't just lie on my sofa, eat really bad food, not exercise, stare at a television all day. It's good to have thoughts questioning why is everyone doing that and changing your life and moving in a different direction. So I would say you try to, as you said, move it in a positive direction that's going to have a real good impact on your life.
Yeah, certainly. If you've got, I think if you have that, there's a book that I read when I was much younger that really changed my life called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
Okay.
And it's absolutely incredible. But he says, if you have the creative spark in you, like you have to follow that. Like you have to do it, because if you don't, first it'll eat away at you, and secondly, and this really struck me, was that like you might be denying the world something amazing. You might make a piece of art that someone hears or watches in a couple of years' time, and it like has a huge impact on them, and maybe it helps them. But when you take that creativity and that intelligence and you point it towards something that is edifying and constructive, it really helps to, because when you're not doing that, for me anyway, when I'm not doing that same engine starts to kind of, tries to do something else. So it starts to become kind of a bit self-involved or whatever, or kind of moving towards anxiety, which is, but it's just being aware of it and, feeding the good wolf, as they say. Something I always found interesting as well was that, like, people say to me sometimes that, is the, like, does meditation and mindfulness like conflict with the the stuff that's in the DP manual, which is like based on cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy, but and at first I kind of thought, well, maybe it does, but then I realized that it really doesn't at all, because to a great degree what cognitive behavioral therapy advocates is just for reframing thoughts and refocusing your attention, right? Which kind of is mindfulness, You're just being mindful of, like, if I have this big terrifying thought about, I feel like I'm not in reality anymore, and it's just okay noticing that thought is there, and then taking your attention and focusing away from it, which again seems like a deeply counterintuitive thing to do because the thought feels so compelling and powerful. But just through mindfulness, you're just saying, okay, no, I'm not, like, I don't have to stop that thought.
Yeah.
But I also don't have to like sit here and ruminate on it for the next 15 minutes. And that's where mindfulness kind of like, the practice of mindfulness, just in a different name, in a different context, there's very much kind of strong connections between mindfulness and the techniques in cognitive behavioral therapy, certainly as they pertain to recovery from anxiety-based conditions like DPDR.
Yeah, that's why I mean, everyone's beliefs is their own, but I now feel like there's often portrayed like there's this clash between sort of science and the spiritual thing, as if, I mean, there's clash between science and religion because obviously, but I don't see this as a religious thing. I'm not saying anyone has to believe in this. This is, to me, is a really scientific practice, as in do practices, do the mindfulness techniques, do these things. If they work for you, then you know it's working. It's like, that's objective. That's evidence based. It's not some. The danger obviously is make you say, people say think spiritual and they think, oh, it's something you have to believe in. I don't want anyone to believe in anything. Practice these things. I think that the linguistics is always what causes the clash. So what I would say is that I think that there's like two things. You want to be engaged in life and move through your life. I think I know in the DP manual says distraction, and I think that, I don't know if that's, I'm kind of like, I feel more like maybe I get what that points to. It means engage in life. You go about, don't wait for the condition to go away in order to live your life. That's a very important thing, and that is. But I also think there's a element of, you don't want to be running from the condition. You don't want to be sort of suppressing it or trying to push it away by like numbing yourself, like by kind of, developing bad habits in terms of I don't know, whether it's overusing your phone or sort of you need to sort of be able to sit on a certain level. That's why I recommend doing it in small doses. Don't overdo it. Like, you don't need to go and become like, sit in a mountain, whatever, for the rest of your life. But that you can see how the thing gets triggered in your head, how the response starts, because then you can catch it. So if you can catch, let's say some people have that thought of like, oh no, am I real? And that can start a whole sequence of thoughts that just doesn't stop, and it just keeps it. So if you can notice that, okay, that's the thought that starts this thing just going, you're in such a strong position to say, as you said, to be able to go, I'm not going to follow that thought stream. I actively choose to redirect my attention and focus in this direction. And I'm not going to go down that path because I know that path does not serve me.
Absolutely. And you made a really interesting point, and this is a question people ask me, is that, if I'm just refocusing my attention away from these thoughts, which is an important part of recovery, but does that mean that I'm running away from them? And don't I need to accept that the thoughts are there? So which is it? Do I accept that the thought is there, or do I run away from them? And it's a false dichotomy. It's the same thing, and here's why. In focusing away from the thought, you are accepting that it's there, right? In stopping what you're doing and interrogating the thought and focusing on it and trying to unpack it, you're not accepting that it's there, and you're trying to change it, and you're trying to stop it. If this is essentially the same thing as having a song stuck in your head. The song stuck in your head is the microcosm version of an anxiety-based condition. It's having a thought that you don't want to be there. It's annoying you, but you want it to stop. If you have a song stuck in your head, what do? You just listen to other music, right? Do you need to like consciously stop what you're doing and accept that the song is there before you? No, of course not. In focusing away from it, you are accepting that it's there. That is implicit and contained in the act of focusing away from it. And this is it's again another one of these things that we do with the best of intentions, that we trip ourselves up by getting caught up in like, but do I need to unpack this to accept
Yeah.
it? No, you don't. That's not accepting it. Um, uh, in focusing away from it is contained the acceptance. So it's actually the same thing.
Yeah, I think what I yeah, that's 100%. I'm also saying that like in I think in terms of emotional, not so much the thoughts. If there's an emotion, like especially one of it's uncomfortable, because I think that's a lot of the time it's like there's an uncomfortable, just kind of like really unpleasant feelings associated with the condition. So you have like this like, and that kind of generates these really uncomfortable thoughts because it's just like this, you're not in your body, you're feeling dissociated, and then these thoughts pop up. And if you were, if you're in normality or, just you're in a peaceful state, that thought comes into your head and you just sort of, it goes and then it just, you just move on. It's not like, so I think that I think it's just like, it's a linguistic thing because it's like multiple different approaches get overlapped and it's kind of, people get confused because there's kind of like different pointers. But if that feeling comes, it's not like, as you said, it's not like I'm going to accept this, and acceptance is like then that means that I'm going to dedicate my whole life to just like following these thoughts. It's not that. It's a really centered place where you say, okay, these things are here. I can't change that. But at the same time, I do have the choice not to feed it, like not to just give it all this attention, and it doesn't need to be anything else than just a feeling and a thought, and then being able to say, and again, this is the amazing power and ability that you can grasp from this condition, is to be able to direct your focus in such a kind of conscious, directed manner. I mean, I can really, it's incredible how you have that skill that you develop from this, because you kind of have to say, I'm not going to put all my attention, I'm not going to spend the rest of this day on these thoughts. I know where they go. I know what happens. It doesn't go anywhere. I'm going to actually redirect my focus onto this, whatever it is. Just if it's talking to someone, if it's, it's doing something creative, going for a walk, I'm going to redirect my focus into that so intensely that I'm just so with what's going on. And I mean, that's what I mean about the aliveness of things. And I mean, it's incredible when you do that. I mean, when you just take something as simple as talking to someone and you give it that level of attention, it's just like, it almost bursts with this level of life that, it's that's why I think it's a real gift, because it's like, people can sense that as well. They sense that you're really listening to them, that you're really there, and it changes the whole dynamic.
Yeah. I think in a society where people's attention is just being dragged left, right, and center all the time, if you could actually just focus, like listen to someone, it's often just unusual for people, like people just well, you're actually listening to what I'm saying, like, and you're not just like going, yeah, nice one, cool, yeah. Yeah, and what you're saying is what you mentioned, Finn, about the thing of being aware of the thoughts and saying like, okay, so I have these thoughts at the moment and I can't change that. So I would add to that, like, that it's like, it's saying like, I can't turn these thoughts off immediately. Yeah. So it's saying, okay, I can and will get rid of them, but it's unfair to expect of myself that I can just switch off this thought immediately. It's the same thing as saying like, okay, like for the next 30 seconds, don't think about pink elephants. Go, It's like okay, just accept that this is there. I don't. Now you don't have to like it. You don't have to do show tunes about it. Like, But you also don't have to consciously ruminate on it and try to unpack it. Something you mentioned as well, Finn, which is really, really interesting, was the people saying like I don't believe I can do this. Like I don't believe I can recover. And
Mm.
people, and this was something that I thought was that, like, even when I saw, this is back in like between 2005 2007, but like, so this is like before YouTube and before social media, um but I would see stories of people who had recovered on, well, not forums, there was a forum, and I would speak to those people sometimes, and I would think to myself, they did it, and what's to stop me? But then anxiety would pop up and say, yeah, but you don't really believe you can. Like, I don't, like,
Mm.
I'm too introspective. My experience with the condition was so horrendous that I don't think I can ever recover. But what I always say to people now is, you don't have to believe it. That's not your business. You don't have, no, like, it's like saying, saying to someone, okay, if you want to lose some weight, um, go down to the gym 4 nights a week and do an hour and a half on the treadmill, right? Um, and you will lose weight, okay? And go for a month. And the person says, I don't believe you. I just don't believe it'll work for me. Like, fine. You don't have to believe it. It will still work. Like, it will still
Mm.
work. But what happens is, we say, I don't believe it, and then that prevents us from going to the gym. Or we say, or we go to the gym for 3 nights, and then they look down and you go, it's not working. It hasn't worked. Like, I was right not to believe this. And then you go back to the drawing board, but what you've done is you've stopped the progress that you were making, because this is progress. It's a process. It's training. You are training yourself out of one habit of thought and behavior and into another, and you have to give yourself the time and the space for that to happen, as you would if you were quitting smoking, if you were learning a language, if you were going down to the gym. You would, of course, give yourself the time and the space for that to recover. But what we do with anxiety, as you were saying, Finn, is that, like, we tend to look at the thought and go, like, I have to stop this now, and
Mm.
then getting frustrated that you can't stop it in that moment, and then spiraling off into a panic attack, and then thinking about it all the next day, and then losing sleep. And yeah, you have to be generous and compassionate with yourself in terms of, like, this is a process. It will work, but you have to give yourself the time and the space to let this go in the background while you're taking your attention and focusing on more positive, interesting, and challenging things.
Yeah, the just to add to that, just that I think I've also learned as well. I don't want to be overly pushy about my own spiritual beliefs, so I'm not going to push that onto anyone. That's up to people to. I'm not interested in doing that. So if people want to, or if they don't like that, they can go a different route. That's fine. But for me, how I understand it for myself is that your thoughts and your emotions are basically residual energies of the past. They're a collection of things that have happened to you because of past experiences. And if those past experiences are incredibly traumatic or perceived as being traumatic, like, for example, a bad drug experience, that can leave a pretty significant mark on your brain. So you get caught in that cycle. And those events, those past events, can leave belief systems about yourself. They can make you believe things about yourself. So if you have this experience, oftentimes, because it's so debilitating, then the belief is, as you said, I can't recover because of X, Y, and Z, or I have this belief system now because of this experience that means that I can't pursue the life that I want to, or whatever it is. And everyone has limiting beliefs. So again, I think it's a very good thing to write down or to understand those belief systems that you have about why you can't do X, Y, and Z, and recognize that, again, they're not ultimate reality. They're not there's no, they're not written. They weren't written in stone. You know, no one, your life is not. It's not just because you have that thought is not a fact that that's the truth of your existence. So you can then look at that belief system and say, well, is this belief system real? Why do I feel like I can't recover? Is that a fact, or is it a belief system based upon previous negative experiences or previous really bad, intense experiences that have caused me to believe X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I think so much of this as well comes down to, and just to follow what you're saying, Finn, it's like the interpretation of difficult experiences is to a great degree what leads to how long they last or how long the impact of them lasts. I mean, something that always kind of struck me as well was that, like, so when I had my experience with DPDR, I was very heavily into reading, like, about, I was into like psychedelic culture. I was a huge fan of, like, still am, of like Terence McKenna,
Yeah,
Robert Anton Wilson, Grant Morrison, all the disinfo stuff. They have a series of books. They're amazing. But I was very heavily into, you know, the kind of often elaborate interpretations of the psychedelic experience, you know, and
yeah,
it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. I love that stuff. Um, but when I had the horrendous experience in Amsterdam in 2005, when I smoked too much weed and I thought it had been dipped in acid. I was tripping so hard, it was horrendous. I think a lot of that kind of tied into it because because in my head I was like, well, now I've, like, to quote Raiders of the Lost Ark, I've been meddling with forces I can't possibly comprehend, you know. I've you know I've opened the Ark of the Covenant, and now I'm stuck with this, like, you know. Um but I also, like, when I look back on it, like, I had friends, like, who were also doing that stuff. I was a musician as well. So I mean, I had friends who were taking, like, industrial amounts of drugs, like, and who would, like, have, like, really, like, horrendous experiences, and the next day they just go and play the gig,
yeah.
right? And it didn't affect them. I remember, like, a conversation with a friend of mine who was a musician, and he was saying, like, oh, I had this, like, absolute, like brutal experience on acid, and I was just like, oh my god, man, like, how did you deal with it? And he was like, I just took mushrooms the next night, it was fine, like, you know. but like, but the thing is that, like, for him, like, that's the end of it. Like, it's just like, well, you just get back on the horse, like. And in my head, I'm thinking, like, if that was me, like, I think I'd have to go and be a monk, like, you know.
Yeah,
But it's so much of it is, like, the interpretation we bring to it, and implying these different kind of contexts to it, that can often be much more dramatic than they need. Because I mean, like, for, you know, when I always say to people who developed DPDR through, like, bad drug experiences, they're like, look, it was difficult. It's a bad weed experience, or a bad anything, 2CB, acid, whatever. It's never pleasant. But also, at the end of the day, it's a drug, right? The drug is in your system, and once the drug is out of your system, the drug is out of your system, right?
yeah,
And worrying that this has had some sort of, like, massive kind of, like, existential kind of compound effect is like worrying that, like, I'm going to drink this coffee, but fingers crossed it doesn't stay in my system or affect my brain for the rest of my life. You know, it's like, well,
yeah,
that's not what it is. So, as we're just discussing interpretation of difficult experiences in that context, in the drug context, it's good to look at it in a very simplified way, and also in terms of, like, the broader experience of anxiety-based conditions. What we do in recovery is we take, as I said, the scaffolding away from it, and just looking at it in the simplest possible terms. this is just anxiety. We have a tendency to put huge, elaborate narratives on top of it to try and explain it, and that makes sense. And I did that too. But part of recovery is taking that scaffolding away from it and just saying, yeah, this was actually quite a simple experience,
Mm.
no matter what triggered it. And what one more thing as well, Finn, I've been reading a really interesting book called The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion by
Oh, nice.
Christopher Germer.
Yeah.
And I came across his work on YouTube. He does he's very much into Buddhism and mindfulness, but in particular loving kindness meditation.
Oh, yeah. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's so good, right? So good.
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about practicing gratitude as well, and the
Yeah.
impact of that. So I've been doing that too. One of the things he talks about is the importance of labeling emotions, so that if you're feeling he talks about shame, which I find absolutely fascinating. But one of the things he says, like, if you are feeling a sense of shame for something that's happened in the past or something you said or did or whatever, if you just stop yourself and say, shame, that's shame, I'm feeling shame. And then there's this other stuff where he says, well, shame is a universal emotion. Like, literally everybody feels this. And what's at the core of shame is the need, is the want to be loved and respected, and for other people to be loved and respected. That's what's at the
Mm.
core of it, right?
Yeah.
It can feel quite dark and kind of poisonous, but like, what's at the core of it is actually love. It's actually I want for connection and happiness. And then you let it go. But the labeling of it changes it. It's like it changes the camera angle on it, right?
Mm.
And it just allows you to put a context on it that allows you to let it go. It gives you a sense of purchase on it. It allows you to hold it more so. And I think the same thing about anxiety and DPDR is that when you discover what it is and it has a name, not only does it have a name, but like, it's extremely common. It's part of an anxiety-based condition, so 1 in 3 people will develop that. Like, all of that labeling on the condition starts to change it, and it makes it less imposing. It becomes less this kind of big, impossible monolith of a thing, and now it becomes, oh, this is actually super common. Most people will experience this at some point in their life, 75% of people. And that context of it, that labeling of it, allows you to think about it differently and allows you to let it go in the same way that you do with, that he says about you could do with like guilt or shame, simply by stopping yourself and saying, that's guilt, that's shame, that thought is anxiety. Just labeling it allows you to hold it and then do something with it.
Yeah. I that's how I mean, it's so powerful, but I think it's so freeing as well. Like, just and the other thing that I want to say about the drug experiences is, one of my favorite places in the world is in the north of Spain, next to where Salvador Dali's house is. And he had an expression where people would ask him, his paintings were wild, like surrealist paintings. And people would say, you do take drugs. And he said, no, I am drugs. And I think that,
Of course he did.
yeah, but I think I don't know if this is true for me anyway. And I feel like if other people are experiencing, DPDR, it has some truth for them as well. I think that for me anyway, my brain has always been on that kind of like, I never had a problem thinking about deep philosophical questions. When I was a kid, I was always interested in profound meaning and things that were sort of not everyday experiences. And the thing to recognize with drugs is that, like, I think for me anyway, my brain is kind of always pretty close to that line of being in a sort of pretty a state where it's kind of already doing all the stuff that drugs kind of does to you. It's like it's already at that point. So I don't need any more stimulation. My brain doesn't need much more stimulation because it actually just overwhelms it and makes it not be able to handle it just fills it with too much questioning. Well, that's the thing what happened to me with smoking weed. It was just like it wouldn't relax me. It would just make me go into this like level of questioning that I had already been doing, but just to this point of where it wasn't anything but just pure anxiety. So I think that would urge people to really look at their substance, how they're using substances. I don't want to make any judgment of people if that's up to them, how they interact with things. But my only word of caution would be to say that quote again from Salvador Dali. Is like, you're pretty much already there if you're experiencing these. Your brain is kind of you don't need to push your brain, and it needs as much relaxation and peace and tranquility as it can get. It doesn't need super levels of pushing it to some sort of extreme, because unfortunately I do think it's not, as you said, we both know people who are able to handle levels of substances that would both send us to a monastery or something. So really recognizing that is important to acknowledge. It's important to really pay attention to what you're consuming and how it is. Is it aggravating or is it easing the condition? And yeah, there's another thing as well, is that I remember I had that, you mentioned that in the book at some stage as well, with thinking that you needed to smoke weed again to go and figure the whole thing out. Like, I did that one time. I remember saying, like, I smoked so much weed, and then the next day I was like, okay, I'm gonna go back in there and I'm really gonna get at the bottom of what that was. And if I just find that, like, if I get back to that thought and I figure out what that meant, then this will all just go away.
Yeah. And it's funny, like, it's on a similar but different note. When I first developed the condition, I had no idea what was going on. I was trying to make sense of it, and what it felt like to me was that I was half asleep. I was dreaming, and I couldn't wake up. So I said to myself, well, Sean, what do you do when you're tired and you're half asleep? You drink loads of coffee. So I drank liters of coffee, like at the start of developing an anxiety-based condition.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. Like, but the thing is that, like, I was kicked, and then when I understood, I was kicking myself. But now I look back and I just think, well, like, we make the decisions that we make with the information that we have.
Yeah,
and at the time, and at the time, I thought, I feel half asleep, I need to wake up, I'll drink loads of coffee. So, and I just felt worse afterwards. But that was just one of like a tapestry of different interpretations of it that I had over the coming months, like, before I actually found out what the term was. But thinking, have I, like, damaged myself with drugs? Have I died? Like, have I, am I a spirit now or something? But again, oh my gosh, like, it's just, I went through like every possible permutation of what this could be, and as we're saying earlier as well, it's like when you were like legitimately saying things to yourself, like, did I like die in a car crash that I can't remember it? Because that seems like the most rational explanation. And then someone says to you, or you come across like something online saying, no, this is anxiety. Then you say to yourself, like, this isn't anxiety. Like, this isn't like the car crash scenario, or the me being in the Matrix scenario feels more apt for the scale of what I'm experiencing than this being anxiety, because I felt anxiety before. This isn't anxiety. But what we realize in recovery is that this is anxiety. That's all anxiety. It's just a
Mm.
different level of anxiety than the frame of reference that you're looking at. Because your frame of reference for anxiety has been, anxiety coming up to a college exam or doing your driving test. That's what you're talking about. But this anxiety is the anxiety that you feel when there's a bear chasing you. This is an ancient evolutionary visceral response
Mm.
to a life or death situation. And like, you would better believe that feeling disconnected from the world around you
Yes.
is part of that, or having heightened visual heightened awareness of your visual cortex, these types of things. But again, we make the best decisions that we can with the information that we have. And it's important to be, compassionate about that as well, especially looking back on decisions like that. Like, I'm going to get to the bottom of it. Like, but sure, at the time, you didn't have any other answers, so why not? Like, but also
Uh,
don't. If I was watching it, don't.
the just another the this is kind of my last kind of key point. Something that I think is if there's one thing that I can say to people is just like I actually didn't think supercharge recovery, because this for me has been, I mean, even just in terms of my thoughts, the way that my thoughts were being structured, I think this is so powerful. We're all, obviously, everyone, the internet is a great thing, but the internet is also, it has its issues as well. In terms of anxiety, um, so I love what part of the one thing that I struggled with for a long time with the condition was that I knew that you had to kind of get yourself out of existential, that you couldn't just be like ruminating on existential anxiety all the time, because that is not really it's not a very good place to be. So, but the thing is that I love, my life is enriched tenfold by doing thought experiments on various different philosophical ideas, spiritual ideas, existential ideas, all these kind of things. It's sort of, it's something I love. But what I noticed is that the way that the internet, especially platforms like if you're watching on YouTube, is that you don't get, if you read a book, you're going to put the book down and you're going to get a break from those ideas, and you're going to have time to actually process and reflect on what you've read. Whereas something like YouTube or a forum, you're not going to, unless you have high levels of self-control, you could spend 6 hours just bombarding yourself with the most out there, like, just anxiety-inducing information. So I think it's really important for people who are struggling with that element of it, because I had that quite intensely, which was that kind of like existential dread. Is you don't need to siphon yourself off from these things, but give yourself. What I do now is if I want to look at something, I'll type it in and I'll watch it, but I'll give myself the time and the space to really think about the idea and process it and bring it into my reality, not like habitually just researching or just becoming obsessed with this thing, which I think is a real danger, especially with the internet. So if you feel like I still want to, there's certain topics or things that I'm interested in. Okay, say I'm going to watch a 10-minute video on this topic, and then I'm going to give myself, I can process that information, but I'm not going to watch 100 videos. I'm not going to spend 4 hours on a forum looking at it. I'm going to give myself the time to digest what people have to say and to process it, and not obliterate yourself with sort of loads of out there information.
I couldn't agree more. Something I thought about quite a lot lately was the idea that the idea of giving your brain time to process things rather than
Mm.
the constant overload. Because what I found was that like my attention span has been like badly affected um by internet use and by social media, or at least it had been, and I would struggle to just like sit down and read a book for half an hour, which is something I would have done no problem when I was younger. Like just like I'd hammer into like a Stephen King book for 4 hours, like not a bother, like.
Mm.
And these days, like, it's just, so I was having trouble with it, but so I just started to be very strict about, like, so if I'm watching a film, for example, my phone gets switched off and I will
Yeah.
watch like there are no interruptions. Same with reading a book, or I'm just trying to kind of do that in my internet use as well, is just be focused on the one thing and try to have less tabs open. And what I found is that it's like when if you're using your computer and you've got like a load of like tabs running, you've got something processing in the background or whatever. And at some point, there's nothing you can do really except leave the computer alone for a couple of minutes and let it catch up, right? And it's almost like that's what your brain does in moments of silence or quietness,
Mm.
um, um, because I think what the internet has taught us to feel is that silence and solitude and quietness are like a waste of time
Yeah.
because right
Yeah.
because the next time you press refresh, like there'll be some like another assassination attempt or something like the news cycle is just happening so quickly now, and it's just so wild, like, or even just going to Reddit and just pressing refresh and there's just a whole new batch of information. But um I think we associate, or I certainly had, like, in a non-verbal sense, associated like not putting information into my consciousness as being that it was a waste of time. But what it does is it allows you to process the information, to contextualize it in a non-verbal sense,
Mm.
and it de-stresses you as well, because Jesus, it becomes very stressful if you're constantly like if you've got like that fire hose of data going into your brain all the time, and then wondering like then for me, wondering why I can't sit down and just like read a book for an hour. The reason
Yeah.
I can't read a book for an hour is because I had 30 tabs open and I was refreshing all the time, and then my brain gets used to that. Yeah.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think that's what I mean about this for me, the, when you have written in your book, the distraction thing, I think that is, I would say, if you're going is to move that focus to something that makes you feel good. So you're taking your attention off the thing, but don't put your attention on to something that's going to make you feel overwhelmed, worse. That attention is so powerful, the way where you put it. And I'd just be concerned that internet use, like, I'm very conscious of it now, the way that I use the internet and the way that I use my phone. And I think that it's very important to recognize the difference between engagement, or like refocusing, and actually like numbing. Because I think there is an element of that internet usage that is, okay, I have DPDR, I have this feeling, I don't like it. And then that can be, the internet is a fantastic tool, so it's absolutely brilliant. But you have to be very mindful and conscious of not using it in a way to sort of suppress or block out the fact that you don't feel comfortable. I think that will show up generally in sort of, just constantly consuming something online, or noticing that you're not actually really with what you're watching, or you're not really with what you're looking at. You're kind of always one step ahead, needing the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. That's a good way of looking at, is the behavior that I'm doing, is it helping my condition, or is it actually me trying to kind of like, I don't, I'm not trying to, I understand the way that you have it in the book. I'm not trying to say that it's, I just think that it's it's like a balancing act between, or the way that you express it to someone may give the a certain idea. But I think it, being in the world and engaging in the world and or having good conversations with people, talking to people, going outside, those kind of things are really going to change your life. And I think it's really important to recognize, am I using the internet as a way to fuel or suppress this condition, or am I using it as a way to enhance my life? I just think those are important questions to ask yourself.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. When we realize the importance of like refocusing attention away from these symptoms, which again is one of the core activities in CBT and acceptance and commitment therapy, although I think it's in acceptance and commitment therapy it's referred to as diffusion. But anyways.
Oh, that's a good word. I like that.
Yeah, it's nice, isn't it? And yeah, because I think like people sometimes hear distraction and they think because it has negative connotations, because I got distracted from the book. I got, but it's essentially, and again, as you said earlier, we get into these kind of like little linguistic kind of cobwebs, like, and we say, oh, but what does this mean? But am I just distracting? And it's like, no, it's, you don't need to overcomplicate it with the vernacular. It's essentially the same core thing. It's so important to train yourself away from these thoughts and feelings of DPDR. But also what you don't want to do is just like be sitting inside playing FIFA the whole day, right?
Yeah.
That's because that's not good for you either. Like you do the basic things of like, you need to be going outside and exercising and socializing. Like the internet can be an absolutely incredible resource, but also you don't want to be on it like 8 hours a day, or just like, well, I like TikTok distracts me, so I'm going to spend like 12 hours on TikTok. But now you're also like your sleep cycle is going to suffer. You're not going to be socializing. There's absolutely like you bringing kind of like common sense kind of daily activities into this. Like it is absolutely using refocusing or diffusion, but in a healthy context, and not just saying like, well, distract myself, cool, sure I'll just like turn on the TV, close the curtains, and wait till I'm better. Like, no, that's not recovery. Like, that's isolating yourself.
Yeah, that's the only thing I wanted to say, because I just think it might, because I notice from the messages that people send me sometimes that they're sort of saying like, like I'm keeping myself super busy, and then I think, yeah, but that's not. It's like keeping yourself super busy by doing really, really negative things for your health is not going to help you get better, because that is just like, it's almost like adding another problem on. You don't want to develop like a really bad coping mechanism. That's the only thing that it's not, it doesn't become a kind of like escapist thing. Because I just noticed that from people who send me messages, you have, your attention needs to go on like we were saying earlier about if it's a gratitude practice, your attention has to go on things that make you feel good. So I would also recommend, just like for people, don't watch the bloody news. Like, watch, like, if you need to be informed, read something about it, watch 5 minutes of it. But then honestly, just switch it off and put your focus and attention back onto things that enhance your life. And it really will just change your perspective and your feeling. You don't need to spend all this time on things that make you feel or exacerbate the condition. Use that ability to refocus onto everything that you always wanted to do in your life. I mean, that is so powerful if you do that. If you take your attention off the DPDR and you focus it onto all the amazing things that you can do with your time and energy. I mean, honestly, there's no limit to what you can do with that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's there are simple things we can do to, I mean, even what would you to deal with like the not just fight or flight anxiety or anxiety based condition, but if you're struggling with like normal day to day anxiety, like what would you do? Like you'd like exercise, like you would reduce your coffee intake, you would like sleep better, you would like socialize more, you'd like there are these broad stroke things that they feel almost kind of cliched, but they like there's a reason that they're there and that they work. So it is about broadening your life out into those things as well. And all you're doing is you're making your recovery as smooth and easy as possible. Like the thing is that like with anxiety and DPDR, like your brain does not need to have these feelings around. Like there's no bear chasing you. The house isn't on fire. You don't need to have the fight or flight system going on. And your brain will let it go and switch it off once you give yourself the chance to do that. And one of the ways that we do that is by living our lives as if we felt no anxiety, and also doing the things that naturally do mitigate anxiety, that raise our serotonin levels, like exercise and socializing and all those good things. Something I wanted to mention as well, Finn, because this is something we spoke about in our first interview.
Yeah.
And it's something that I speak to people about all the time, and I've actually worked it into the DP manual. Is the idea of a half-assed recovery. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's because and that was your phrase, and it's brilliant because, people, the cycle that people get into, and I did this for a long time, is you find the correct things, you find the information that you need to recover. You go, okay, here's what I need to do. Here's all of these people who have done this and recovered. But there's a core fear that says, what if I do that and I can't recover? So what people do is they start doing the things to recover, the stuff in the DP manual or whatever, but they don't quite commit to it. So they'll kind of do it halfway, or maybe they'll follow some of the rules, but they'll just keep researching it. And then they prevent themselves from recovering. But what they say is, well, I didn't recover, so I'll go back to the drawing board and I'll try something else, or I'll try a combination of different things. But what's at the core of it is the fear that what if I do the things that other people have done to recover and it doesn't work? Because that's a lot more terrifying than doing a half-assed job and not recovering. Because if you kind of half do it and you don't recover, then you still can go back to the community. You can still go back to the Reddit forums. You can still go back to the posts and say, sure, it's, I mean, I felt a bit better, but things didn't quite work or whatever. And it's easier to do that than the prospect of putting your heart and soul into it and it not working, because then you're completely on your own. But the thing is, though, is that when you do this, when you follow these rules and you put your heart and soul into it, it works. Like this isn't like, let's see what happens. It's like, it works. It always works, because what you're doing is you're reversing the process that caused this to happen in the first place. But you can't do it half-assed. It's like kind of half-assed changing any habit. I'm going to lose weight down at the gym, but I'm not too pushed about it. Like, well, you'll get the results. Like if you're half-assed about quitting smoking or learning a language, like that's what you'll get. But in a compassionate sense, and I say this because I was that guy for a long time.
Oh yeah,
I was that guy for a long time. Even when I was really on the road to recovery, and I was seeing results, I was seeing changes, I still would trip myself up, and I would still like end up back on some forum or I'd have a symptom and I would say, oh, I need to check that out, and I'd be back discussing it, tripping myself up over and over again. But again, what was at the core of that fear was the worry that like, what if I do what these other people did to recover and I can't recover? So if I do a half-assed recovery, at least I'll have the comfort of knowing that I could always go back to that community. Yeah.
That's very interesting. It's very interesting that you say that, because that's something that I have been reading on. Not actually in this context at all, but just it's this the idea that that I've been reading about has got to do with safety, mechanisms, and how, we, even though it's self-destructive, the thing that we are familiar with, the thing that we know, again, this got to do with identity as well, our sense of identity, where it comes from. So if our identity is very caught up in DPDR, checking a DPDR form will give you a sense of safety. It will give you a sense of comfort. It will give you a sense of, other people in the world who feel the way that I feel. And unfortunately, that becomes an addiction, a slight sort of anxiety hit addiction, where you almost become habituated, because it gives you a sense of reassurance, a sense of safety. Because as you're saying, like, recovery and that it's a scary thought, because what it actually is it's a different reality. It's a different life. It's a different way of being in the world. And that can be quite, I mean, you think, saying, oh yeah, when this condition is going to go away, that may come with having to go face your fears, having to go do things that you wouldn't normally do because of the condition. So you have to, it can be quite daunting. So it's quite daunting to say, well, I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to do everything that I'm going to do if I didn't have the condition. Or I could just hit this button on this laptop and I can get a sense of safety and reassurance that everything is as it is. So yeah, I think it's got to do with comfort, and even though it's kind of just it is kind of like incredible how the very thing that you're trying to overcome becomes its own. It almost like your own behavior blocks you from overcoming it, because you kind of get this. I remember that feeling of researching the condition online, and you get this weird sort of like hit. Like, it was almost like a bit of a drug, where you get the kind of like, oh, someone else, also has this thing that I have. And yeah, I think it operates like a kind of a really bad addiction, but a kind of like fear-based addiction, where that hit of that fear and that adrenaline, it gives you a rush, it gives you a sort of feeling. But then ultimately you're not really gonna progress or move on.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right in terms of how the forums, they offer a sense of comfort. They do, and also, and I think definitely specifically at the start, like when you find those forums first and you see that, like, how common this is, there's entire communities of people who have had this or are going through it. There's a huge sense of relief. I mean, it's wonderful. Like, and to just see other people and talk to other people, that for me, that was huge. But like, as any medical professional working in anxiety will say, like, okay, you have to get off those forums. Like, you have to stop. There comes a point where you have to stop scratching the itch of keeping, of addressing these constant questions, because we think that if I keep answering these questions, I get to a point where there's no questions left. There's always more questions, because the questions are the condition. It's like we were saying earlier about the pink elephants thing. For the next 30 seconds, don't think about pink elephants. And then if you say, well, but I'm really scared of these thoughts about pink elephants. Do other people have thoughts about pink elephants when they're driving? And then you go onto the forums and you look it up, and then you see that someone says, "Oh yeah, when I'm driving, I think about pink elephants." And you go, Thank God. Okay, that's good. That's good. But the problem is that now you've spent like 25 minutes on the Pink Elephants forum at a time when you don't need to be thinking about it at all. And all your brain is registered is that like this is important. Like now we stopped doing what we were doing to look at the Pink Elephants forum for 25 minutes. And you may have gotten that sense of relief for like when you saw the post. But then you wake up the next morning and you're thinking about it again. And you wonder why, because you think, but I got the answer. Again, the brain doesn't care about positive or negative. It just cares about what are we focusing on. And with the best of intentions, we keep focusing on these questions and trying to answer them, and then wondering why that feedback loop keeps going. Again, it's just one of a number of these profoundly counterintuitive things about how the mind works or the brain works. But when we understand them and we start to say, okay, I'm going to change this. It feels weird to do it, but I'm going to change this. I'm going to, because when you stop researching it, when I read like, okay, stop researching it, I was like, but that means I'm giving up, like, doesn't it? Doesn't that mean I just give up and I live with it? But that's ridiculous. But it's not. It means that you're giving yourself the space to stop thinking about it, and you're just taking your foot off the pedal, and you're taking your attention and putting it onto reading Lord of the Rings instead, and then your brain goes,
Hey,
oh,
yeah.
nice. Nice. And also, are you wearing a Jurassic Park t-shirt?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Oh, come on. um, and the thing is that when you go and read Lord of the Rings instead, or you watch Jurassic Park instead, then your brain kind of goes like, oh yeah, this is much like Lord of the
I
Rings is
remember
much
this.
better. Like, yeah, like I've been spending all of my time like with this washing machine of anxiety, throwing stuff into it and seeing will that slow it down or will it make it stop or what's going to work. And then after a while, just go, okay, look, if that's going to keep going, fine. But I'm going to read the Two Towers, like, because it's about.
That's a great washing machine of anxiety is a great. That's an album title, I think, but that's a great analogy. Um, yeah, I don't want to over burden people with information about it, but I wanted to clarify that um I think there's a way to mix different I think for me what has really taken, well, just my life in general to another level is being the last thing I'll say on the kind of the spiritual front is that even if you're an atheist, if you can, I do this every morning and I really think this is really powerful for shifting your focus. If you ask whatever you feel comfortable for guidance, even if you just want to say like, I asked Charles Darwin for guidance. I don't know. Whatever you want to put as, in Alcoholics Anonymous, they say higher power. So whatever that higher power is to you, whether it's just, there being whatever it is, I'm not trying to make people believe anything, but I'm saying that if you ask for guidance and if you also say, how can I sort of surrender and follow whatever it is being asked me. How can I act and work in the world today? Over time, it shifts your perspective away from your sort of sense of this individual self in your head that sort of has all these demands, and it goes left and right, left and right. 1 minute it says, do whatever. It's getting into the world out of this sort of very limited, just constant noise, anxiety based thing in your head, and more into like your world around you. And that will bring you out of your head and into your body and into the world, and giving over to the fact that there is no way of knowing all the things about the universe. You don't have to ask. You don't have to try to figure it all out. That you can just live and do the things that you're doing as best as you can, and as much taking that focus and attention away from what's going on in your head, and not needing to have all the answers, or not needing to have all the not needing to sort of figure it all out before you do something.
Yeah. Action comes before emotion. Yeah. If you with anxiety recovery, what often happens is you think, I'll wait till the right time. I'll wait until I feel ready to do this. And the thing is that you'll never feel ready. In the same way that for anything that's challenging, you never feel ready for it, but that doesn't matter. You go and do it anyways. And then afterwards or while you're doing it, you go, oh yeah, I was ready to do it. We get into these kind of cycles of avoidance that prevent us from doing things. And God knows I did that for almost 2 years. But I know, as I was saying about going back to college and doing the master's degree, did I feel ready to do it? I did my eye. I was just this is the worst thing I could possibly do. And then I went and did it, and I was I was completely ready to do it. It was it was just anxiety questioning everything, because that's anxiety's job. But when I stopped answering those questions and giving it the time of day, my brain said, oh wow, well this stuff is much more interesting. Let's do that instead. Finn, we might leave it there. So
I think that's definitely enough information.
I think we've covered a lot. Great.
Can I just add one thing that I'm going to be so on my own YouTube channel, which is just my name, I will be doing a kind of series of videos just on my my experience with DPDR, and also I think as well. Now, I do want to say to people that will be some things that I think will be, as you said, my perspective on the condition looking back. So I want to preface that by saying that if you're in the midst of a seriously difficult, if it's really challenging, you don't have to watch anything that makes your anxiety any more difficult. So there may be concepts or things that I might speak about that may make people may feel more anxious or not. So I always say that if it makes you feel more anxious, it's not time to watch that yet. Maybe at a later point watch it or something. But I do want to do I will be doing a series where I talk about my experience, what it means to me, and how I see it now. So just for people if they want to eventually watch that.
Fantastic. Well, we'll add the link to your YouTube channel in the video description. People can go check that out if they like. Finn, it's been so great to chat to you, man.
Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed it, and I hope the music sessions in Wales go fantastic. And also when that stuff comes out, if it's on Spotify or SoundCloud, send me over the link and I'll add that into the video description as well.
Oh, amazing. Okay? Of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no bother. Okay, great to see you again, Finn. Take care, man.
Thanks. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.